Please have a seat this morning. That song is awesome, and you guys did a great job with that. So, I don't have a sermon. We're doing a series called Is He Enough? And so in just a second, I'm going to introduce somebody to you. But first, I wanted to just set this up. One of the things that I can't stand about church, yeah, I'm a pastor, but I'm also a sinner and a failure. And one of the things I can't stand about church is that we get together a lot of times and we kind of put on a face like everything's okay. And we put on our Sunday best, maybe not in this church, but we come and we put on a facade that, you know, everything is great. Raise your hand if everything is not great. Yeah, I mean, why can't we just get up and tell the truth? It's like it's okay to say, I used to be this, or I used to do that, or I struggled with that, but now I'm all okay. Well, I'm afraid to tell you something. If that's where you're at, you're probably more messed up than you think. Because we should be able to get up and say, you know what sucks? Life is hard. Jesus was the one who spoke the world into existence. That song blows my mind because God the Father, yes, is there. In the beginning, he said, I was the beginning. But we learn in the New Testament that it was Jesus who's actually the Word. And he spoke the Word into existence. And then he comes in the flesh and he says things like this. The thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. And in this world, you're going to have trouble. It's going to be difficult. You're going to be crushed and broken. And so don't get together on Sunday morning and act like it's all okay, because it's not. Because the only one who ever was able to be crushed, broken, and then get back up was Christ. And so what I'm here to say is, though the thief comes to steal and kill and destroy, Jesus come to give us life. And even though we're crushed, we can get life and get back up daily, minutely, if necessary. Amen? I just want to be a church where it's real, or else I don't want to do it. Okay, so here's the thing. There's this woman who came in here. I don't even remember how she got here. Somebody let her in. And she was hanging around here, and then one day I had this secretary, and nobody liked her. Mostly women, yeah. And so anyway, she didn't work out. She quit. And then I said, well, we need to put it in the bulletin and put it out in the news that we need to hire somebody to do this job because I really need a personal assistant, not like serve me personally, but, you know, like a secretary and all that kind of stuff. And this woman who'd been hanging around says, I'll take that job. And I said, yes, ma'am. And after that, I've said yes, ma'am, like 10 million times because she's now the boss. And she takes care of me like no other. She takes care of this church like no other. She is the kindest person I have ever met. She serves the daycare, the preschool, even though it's not her job. She's here early, she's here late. She's the first person in the building this morning. She's the last person in here virtually every night. And at the same time, she's been going through her own personal hell. I would like to introduce Susan, my friend. Susan is not a public speaker, but she is awesome. So here's her story.
Okay, thank you. Well, since Jim kind of already did the introduction, I don't think I need to. Jim came to me, probably about a month ago, and he said, before you say no, let me talk to you a minute. And we were talking about the series, and like you said, I'm not a public speaker, and I really didn't want to because I said, I'll probably cry. And he said, that's okay. You know, we want this to be real. So here I am. I'm going to share a story with you, and as most of you know, back in September last year, my husband passed away. And we'd been married about 34 years. And I was his caretaker at home probably 6 to 7 years. He was pretty much bedridden at that time for those 6 or 7 years. So if anybody is going through the same kind of thing here, just know that we here at the church are here to help you and listen to you, encourage you. If anything like that's going on in your life or anything else, trouble with kids or anything like that. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about my husband. Like I said, we were married for 34 years. We got married in June of 1983. And as you can see, there's a considerable age difference. Tom was 30 years older than I was, but we had such a good life together. We had many struggles and disappointments and disagreements throughout our married life, as most married people do, but we made it work. When I married Tom, he had 4 adult children. So I became a stepmother to 4 adult children, and one of them was even older than me by a couple years, or a year or two. So life goes on, and there's the boys, and that's a really old picture, and they probably wouldn't like it, but it's always one of my favorites, and that's our son Christopher. Chris looks like he's probably around a year old. So we have a house full. We have 4 boys there, and it was a full house, and it was crazy and chaotic. And the adult children came and went, and there's Christopher as a baby with Tom. But then a few years later, our daughter, Erin Kathleen, was born. So we still had a full house. She doesn't look too happy there, but I always love that picture of those 2 together. Still a full house. It was a lot of fun. Like I said, it was chaotic, but I kind of always had a babysitter at home, too, with all those kids there. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Tom. Tom retired from the federal government in 1982. So when we had the babies, he stayed home and took care of them, and I was at work. But it was hard. I was jealous because he got to stay home with the kids and I didn't, but it worked, and he was an awesome father. He told me many, many times that having his second family was probably the best thing that ever happened to him. It kept him busy in retirement, kept him really busy, probably busier than he wanted to be, but he really enjoyed it. Tom and I didn't attend church. Very, very rarely we attended church while we were married. Tom was raised and schooled in the Catholic Church, and I was raised in the United Brethren Church. And as my parents were very, very active in the church. We went to Sunday morning, we went to Sunday evening, we went to Wednesday. My mom played the piano. My dad was a deacon, and it was just, our lives revolved around church. But when I was in my 20s, I kind of quit going to church. Tom and I would take the kids every once in a while, but we never really did agree on doctrine. And it was hard for me, and I even went to a couple Catholic classes for him to see what I thought. And I just knew it wasn't for me. But as I told you before, Tom had retired on a disability, and most of his health issues at that time were cardiac related, but he had other issues as well. In the spring of 2015, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And if anybody knows of anyone that has this disease, or a family member that's dealing with this disease, you know how awful it is. And I'm going to give you a quick story how all this came about. Tom had slipped down the steps, probably in, I don't know, it was 2011 probably, and torn the meniscus in his knee. And we had went to an orthopedic doctor and had several visits where they put the shots in it and everything else, and it wasn't getting any better. So they brought another physician in, or another orthopedic doctor, and he said, well, we need to do surgery. And I said, well, you had said before that was a last resort, because Tom had blood clots in his legs the year before, where they had even implanted an IVF filter. So he was a very high surgical risk, and we had to get permission from his cardiologist to conduct this, but everybody seemed to think it was going to be just fine. So they did the surgery in July of 2011 on an outpatient basis up at Sycamore Hospital. And then when I get him home, he's just really complaining about a lot of pain. And I thought, well, it's probably pretty normal. You know, they scoped his knee. So the week later, we go back and see this orthopedic doctor. And he says, well, he just needs to start physical therapy, because I was telling him how much pain he was in. He's like, he needs to move around more, and he needs to go to physical therapy. And I said, his legs are swollen. And then he said, well, you know, our physical therapy department is right here in the building. You go over and make your appointment right now. And I said, you know, you realize both of his legs are swollen. And he just didn't seem to care a whole lot. So we go over to the physical therapy department and stand in line, and Tom was just feeling so bad and in so much pain. We just never even made that appointment that day. Well, the next day, he is in such bad, severe pain. Our son came by. Christopher had to carry Tom and put him in the car. So we go back up to Sycamore Hospital, and then they run some tests, and they do the ultrasound of his legs. And once those came back in, you could just tell. Everybody was very, very serious. And just the kind of the looks they gave me, I knew it was bad. So they admitted him. We're in the room, the hospitalist takes me out in the hallway, and he says, "Is there a vascular surgeon you would like me to call?" And I said, well, Dr. Bruce Rank had done his heart surgery about 20 years ago, and I really liked him and have a lot of trust in him. I said, will you call him? So he did. Dr. Rank comes in that night, 8 or 9 o'clock at the hospital, and he sits down with us, and he explains to us how serious this is. He says, I'm going to go home, I'm going to do some research, I'm going to call some other physicians, but I want to let you know he may not even survive this, because we just don't know how we're going to handle it right. So the next morning they transport him, they decide to do surgery, and they transport him to Kettering Hospital. He was in surgery because he had the blood clots in both of his legs. So he was in surgery probably 5 to 6 hours. And so as we're waiting around, and then he goes to the ICU. And he ended up being in the hospital during that time, or at different facilities, because they would transport him to St. Leonard's, and then he'd get sick again, and he'd be back in the hospital. But it was about 5 months that year. And he was very critical after his surgery. He was in ICU, as I said. And then even weeks later, the doctor would come by every day, and he would tell me, he's not out of the woods yet. So Tom was unable to walk because of these surgeries. So he was bedridden. He had gone, I guess we had gone then out to St. Leonard's for more rehabilitation. And they worked with him. He was there quite a long time. And they worked with him, and they had occupational therapy, and they had physical therapy. So we were able to bring him home, I think it was December 30th or December 31st of that year. And I do recall one sad thing that happened. On Christmas Day, we had received permission to take him home to spend Christmas with the family, and then we would have to take him back. And he just, I think we had to have him back by 5 or 6 o'clock, but he was just so concerned about getting back there. And it just seemed like he started to think of that facility as his home. And that was very sad. Well, I get him home, and things are going pretty well. He is walking with a walker, and we have to use the gait belt to steady him too. And we always had to walk behind him. So I was told that I should not leave him alone, that someone needed to stay with him all the time because of the risk of him falling, and then on the blood thinners, because of the blood clots, he could hit his head and he would bleed out, and it would be, it could be fatal. So prior to all of this happening, I had quit my job. I was working for a law firm, and I'd been there like 22 years or so. And I had quit my job. The kids were out on their own. They were doing fine. And it was something that I wanted to go back to college. I wanted to be a nurse. So I was going to Sinclair prior to all this happening, and I wanted to be a nurse, like I said. I applied at Kettering College and got accepted, so I started the nursing program. And it was hard. And you're in your late 40s and you're starting school, and it was very, very difficult, but I just loved it. I just wanted to be a nurse. Well, when he was hospitalized and all of these things happened, I tried to stay in school for a while because he was at Kettering. So I would spend the nights at Kettering Hospital and get up and go home and get ready and come back to Kettering and go to school during the day. So at one point, we're getting back home again, and I'm thinking, well, it's January. I'll be able to start in January. Well, he wasn't well. He was just too weak, and I couldn't leave him. We had even tried to schedule that he would go to like an adult daycare, and he did not want to go. So I just couldn't do that to him. So I stayed home. And I thought, well, I'll get him back in the next semester. But that didn't happen. I was never able to go back and finish that. So we had physical therapists come into our house. I think she came about 3 times a week. And he would work for her, but you're supposed to keep working on it after they leave. And he just didn't want to. I'm sure he was just plain tired. I wanted to get back. I wanted to get back to school. I wanted to get back to my friends and my studies, because this was supposed to be my time. It wasn't supposed to be for him. I thought, well, I've worked a job I didn't like. I've sacrificed for the family, and it's my time now. But God showed me a different way. So, like I said, I stayed home with him, and it's a tough thing to do. People quit calling, friends people don't come around like they used to. You can't really leave the house, so you stay home. And that's kind of hard at times. Family members come, but, they kind of start staying away. I don't know if they're afraid they're going to be asked to do some care or something like that. But so it gets pretty exhausting. You don't get a lot of sleep. You're up and down. You've got a lot going on your plate. And then I was, I don't know, I think it was July that year anyway, and I was driving up here. I was taking my granddaughter to swim lessons, and I saw the sign. The sign had changed, and I thought, well, what happened to the Presbyterians? I wonder what happened to them. So I saw the website, and went home and looked at it, and I thought, well, I think I might like that church. So that's how I started coming here. But then once again, it was 2015. Tom was back at St. Leonard's again for rehabilitation. The staff started conducting some tests about his comprehension, his reading, motor skills, things like that. And they came back to me and they said, we believe he has Alzheimer's. Well, that really hit me like a ton of bricks. He had experienced some memory loss and confusion at home, and we just kind of attributed it to age, but it's not, well, it was part of it, but it was Alzheimer's. Tom had been a computer systems analyst for the federal government, and he was one, he could read 2 or 3 books at a time. He did the crosswords all the time. He could even do the New York Times, the Sunday New York Times crossword puzzle. He was a very intelligent man. But now he didn't even know my name sometimes. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know the grandkids' names. He was so easily confused. We had to sleep with the lights on because he was scared. Like I said, he wanted me there with him all the time. He didn't want me to leave the house. Really didn't even want me to leave the room. So there wasn't much of a break. And I thought I was going to lose my mind sometimes. And he called for me constantly. I would be trying to keep up with the house or cook some meals, and he was always calling me. And it would be like, what are you doing? Or, I didn't know. I thought you left the house. Where have you been? And then a lot of times it's like, where's the remote? And I'm like, okay, you're laying on it, but that's okay, we'll get it. But you get really frustrated and angry and resentful. And it's hard to be a caregiver when you feel that way. So there would be times I'd text Pastor Jim and he'd say, you want to come up and talk? And I'm like, well, yeah, I want to get out of this house. Yes, I do. But really what I want to do, I wanted to leave home. I didn't want to do this anymore. I wasn't strong enough. And you often think when bad things happen, you think, well, I'm a good person. Why is all this bad stuff happening to me? But little do we know, it just makes us such a stronger person once you get through it and you can look back and say those things. But this is one of the scriptures Pastor Jim gave me one time when I was up here complaining. But first, seek his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. But I have to tell you, it all wasn't so terrible and bad. We became closer. He may have lost his short-term memory, but he could remember his younger days. And we talked about that stuff a lot, many, many times. I know I heard a lot of it repeated, but that's okay. The TV thing, though, it always had to have the TV on. We always did, and it was sad that he could no longer do his crosswords or read a book. But one thing he always remembered, and this was so strange, that the Time magazine came on Tuesdays. But he would always remember that, where's my Time magazine? Where's my Time magazine? And I don't even think at that point that he could comprehend or read, but he would put his glasses on and he would sit there with that for at least an hour. And then, I don't know if it was July or August of last year, he was sick again. So call the rescue squad, we go to the hospital. He had pneumonia and he had a blood infection. So he's at Kettering for about a week. And I noticed he was just different this time. He slept a whole lot. He was very, very confused. And he wasn't like himself at all. But they get him well. They tell us the infection is cleared. And once again, we're out to St. Leonard's for physical and rehabilitation. And he was there for several weeks. And the nurse practitioner came to me one morning. And she says, she kind of takes me aside. She says, you need to talk to him about his wishes. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she, and then we started talking about blood results and what was going on with his body. I was stunned because Tom had always rallied. He'd always gotten better. So we had a few days there, the family and I, and we discussed a lot of things. He wouldn't eat, so that was the big issue. He would not eat. He absolutely would refuse food. Well, his body was shutting down. I guess we just didn't realize it until somebody spoke it to us. So they talked to us about putting a feeding tube in, and our daughter Erin had talked to some other nurses she knew there and everything, and it was not going to prolong his life or his quality of life. So we decided against it. So we called hospice and we went home. He was very happy at home. He was just, couldn't wait to get back home. Let's see. I was hoping we'd have a couple more months together, but we didn't. But on that first night, he was just so happy to be home, and he really rallied. And his family flew in. Some of his family flew in from Massachusetts to come and see him. That's probably one of the last pictures I took of him. But that's probably maybe a year before he passed. But we had hospice come in, and they were just awesome. They came, the nurses would come just as much as you needed them. They got the supplies for us, the medication, and different people to come in and help with his care. So I was kind of relieved from some of that, and I could just be his wife and not his caretaker. There would be nights, midnight, you notice something changes, you're scared, you don't know what's going to happen. You could pick up the phone, and hospice would have a nurse at your door in an hour. Well, our daughter Erin was living with us at that time, so she was helping me a lot with his care. And our son, who lives in Bellbrook with his wife and 4 children, he took leave from his job and moved right in. And they took over the majority of the care, along with the hospice people. And I was so proud of them. They were so loving and gentle and kind with their father. They would stay up all night just to watch him breathe, give him his meds. They would turn him every 2 hours so we wouldn't get bed sores. And another thing they had to do was give him all this medicine. We had a lot of pain meds because I didn't want him to be in pain any longer because he had suffered with so much pain in the past. So the kids kind of took care of all that stuff. On the Saturday before he died, and he was pretty much unconscious by this time, we had a nurse come in. I think it was probably, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and this nurse said, I don't think it'll be much longer. But they also told me to quit I didn't have to quit. Hovering, that was what I was good at. I was hovering right over it. And I didn't really realize it, but the hospice people had told us, by hovering like that, she said, you're just prolonging his death. But she said, you can do what you want to do, but I just want to let you know that. So we tried not to do that as much. But it was during all of these times, God was with me, because I don't know how I got through it. Our home was loving and calm. On the day he died, we had his music playing that he loved so much. The kids were there. We were laughing. We were looking at pictures and remembering all the good times. So throughout all this, Our family made it. We just got closer when you go through something as devastating as that. I don't know how I did it. I held Tom after he took his last breath and talked to him. I tried to stay strong, making the funeral arrangements. I stood beside his casket and greeted everybody that came. I couldn't have done that without God in my life. The weeks that followed, I don't even know how I got out of bed because I sure didn't want to. Sorry. It's hard to face the day without your husband. But God was with me. It was about a week later I returned to work. And I had always worked here as a part-time basis because Jim had always told me, take care of your husband and what you can do for us, come up and do that. So that's the kind of way we worked it. And so I asked Jim, I said, do you want me to work more? And he's like, well, sure. There was no way at that time in my life that I could have started the job interview process and the resumes. I had worked at my other job for like 20 years, so I was very, very rusty. So to be able to stay here was a blessing. So I just want to let everybody know, when you're going through all of this, God is there too, and He's with you, and you don't think you're going to get through it, but you do. I still struggle. I'm sad. I'm lonely. I do feel like, God's given me this gift to be able to be up here. I love it up here. Being with all the people at Harvest. So that's my story.
Thank you, Susan. I just remember this one day, as the band comes up, I remember this one day Susan came up here and she wanted to talk to me, and we sat back in the fellowship hall, and she looked at me with tears in her eyes and she said, I can't do this. I can't do it. And of course, I'm sitting on the other side, thinking to myself, I don't know how she is going to do this, but I need to give her hope. And so I just said, you can do it. But you just have to do one day at a time. One day at a time. And I guess that's what I can offer you wherever you're at. And everybody raised their hands, and everyone said, you're struggling. And I am too. And so I guess I just have to remind myself, like I reminded her that day, you can do it. One day at a time. Amen.